Good day, welcome to the Funmaster Studio. And as you know that we've tried to interview a lot of people. It could be real estate agents, it could be top bankers, it could be top business people, entrepreneurs. But it's always coming down to what's happening in the world of economy. What do we do these days? And it's a lot more discussions around the OCRs, the interest rate impacts, and the other jargons, the GDPs, and we talk about recession. There's so much. We thought, okay, let's talk to someone who is not only the chief economist of one of the leading banks in New Zealand, but he's also had a journey from being a lecturer in the year of 2000 in Massey University and now being the chief economist of Kiwibank. So today I would like to welcome Jarrod Kerr from Kiwibank. He's the chief economist, and today he comes on our invitation, and this is a discussion which is not any advice. This is a general discussion between two people, one from the economic background and one from a mortgage industry, where outside versus inside are discussing what can we take towards the common man. The normal person or common man sitting at home, they don't know what is happening in the charts and graphs like me. So why not ask someone who knows it and who can break it down to people what is palatable, what they can hear and understand better. So welcome, Jarrod. First of all, thank you for joining the Funmaster Studios for this, exclusive interview with you. And thank you so much for accepting this. But overall, what's this journey from, how do you feel from being a lecturer and to the chief economist and doing so much overseas as well? How's this whole thing for you?
Well, thank you very much for having me on today. It's a great opportunity to discuss, as you say, everything that's going on in the world right now. It's very complex and it's very difficult to gauge, but I'm sure we'll do that today. In terms of my career, starting out doing a number of jobs, but getting a lecturer role at Massey University, that was a lot of fun for me, and funnily enough, I've actually gone back to Massey and I've started lecturing again. So I do love that job, but I moved on as most people do when you finish your degree. I went to Australia and I got a job at a academic think tank, basically helping the universities get access to data. I got my first real job at JP in 2004. One of the world's largest banks, an American bank, and I learnt how to be an economist at JP. It was a great training ground. Worked on a trading floor, which was very exciting. 2007, 2008 crisis hit, and there was blood on the trading floor. It got really messy really quickly. I then moved to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is a massive bank, like really, really big bank globally, but in Australia it's the largest. And I learned a lot about banking, retail banking and investment banking at the mighty CBA. I was then lucky enough to be poached by Credit Suisse in Singapore. They wanted someone to head the sort of economics and strategy for the company on Australia and New Zealand. So I did that. My wife and I moved to Singapore. Absolutely loved it. Really loved being in Singapore. All the travel you can do around Asia. Really nice country, friendly country, great tax rate. And then ultimately I moved back to New Zealand. There comes a time in your life where you have a child like we do, and we wanted our son to go to a New Zealand school, so we moved back in 2018, and I was fortunate enough to get the role as a chief economist of Kiwibank.
Oh, and the journey has been good because Kiwibank is in a growth strategy mode. The change of CEO when Steve came in and all those, it's a very good look, the new branding, everything is so great. It also is welcoming for a lot of customers. I have seen the shift of a lot of people myself, that the part it's being played for customer-centric bank. I think somewhere, New Zealand banks were losing being, the customer centricity, and now it's you get it back in how customer-focused banks can be. So it's great, but so overall it's been great that you've traveled across the world. You've seen different places. You've seen interest rates. You've seen mortgages. You've seen everything. But today I thought that how do we bring back some basics to the people? I'm not an economist. I never did economy. What we read is, sometimes it becomes a jargon kind of oriented word. And there's a lot more. How do we break it down into basics for an economist? There are a lot more factors you see. But for a layman like me or someone who's, sitting, would watch the show or looking at stuff, how can we break out of some stuff that, what is macroeconomics, what is micro, what are these things, what are the controlling factors, what is it for that person across the screen watching this who would really want to know on basic terms, what is it all about?
Well, I think for most people and businesses, it's about interest rates.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's where you feel the change in economic policy. It's with interest rates. So if you have a mortgage or if you're a business and you have a loan, interest rates have risen a lot in the last year and a half. Why? Well, we had a COVID shock, and we had a government and a central bank that literally threw billions of dollars at the problem, and in hindsight they did too much. So interest rates were cut too low, the government spent too much money, and we found ourselves with a very heated economy. We had supply shocks, we had demand shocks, and they led to a very, very high rate of inflation. So prices in the economy, are rising at too high a clip. And we've all experienced it. We've called it the cost of living crisis, where prices are rising by more than incomes, and going down and getting groceries, is much more expensive. Food prices are up 20% in the last year. A lot of reasons behind all of those price rises, but basically prices rose at quite a high clip globally. We had a spike in oil prices, for example. We were importing a lot of inflation. Half of the inflation that we feel comes from overseas. The other half we generate ourselves. And a lot of inflation came out of the housing market.
I know we talk about this word. What is inflation for a general normal man? What does inflation mean?
So price rises. So as prices rise, we say, well, that's inflation.
And you said we brought in a lot of inflation. What was that factor of bringing in? How do we bring in inflation?
So prices rise globally, particularly oil prices, and we import oil, and it goes into our car as petrol. So petrol prices rose quite a lot, and the prices of a lot of the goods that we import from overseas rose as well. There was also some issues with shipping costs, so shipping costs rose during COVID with many ports being shut. Supply issues led to prices being ratcheted higher, and we experienced that locally. You import that inflation, and that goes into the basket of goods that we consume. So we take a whole lot of goods and services that households consume, and we just measure what the prices are doing over time. And our inflation rate got over 7%, which is very high, and that hurts a lot of households. It hurts households on lower incomes a lot more than it hurts households on higher incomes. And the central bank, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, is very proud of the fact they were one of the first, or if not the first, major central bank to target inflation. They knew that if we can keep inflation low and steady, then that's going to help with people making decisions about the future. High and variable inflation rates make it difficult for businesses to think about where they need to set prices. Is it a good time to invest right here, right now, inflation rates are too high and businesses are uncertain about investing in their business, and that kills growth straight away.
So this basically inflation and Reserve Bank, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 1990 Reserve Bank started to control inflation by interest rates, right? We were the first bank in the world, New Zealand, right? First Reserve Bank to do that.
Yeah.
Now my question is that, okay, inflation came and we brought in inflation, we bought, petrol prices were high, everything was high. How does the Reserve Bank link inflation to OCR? What is that link which derives that if they're increasing the OCR, well, that increases a lot. But what is the link between inflation and OCR, and what is OCR?
So the official cash rate is the cash rate that the central bank deals with the retail banks on an overnight basis. So they can lift or lower the OCR, and that feeds through to all interest rates in the economy. It affects the interest rate on government bonds, so what the government has to pay, and then affects mortgage rates, business lending rates. All interest rates across the economy are affected by the Reserve Bank's cash rate. So the Reserve Bank looks at inflation, and they're looking at inflation now and going, it's too high. We want that 6-7% inflation rate. We want it back down to 2, because 2 is where we think is stable, and 2 is where we want it to be. To get it down there, they have to slow the economy down. They have to restrain demand, and to do that, they lift interest rates. So you lift interest rates, it increases savings, number one, but it also decreases investment and spending. So that's the important mix. As interest rates rise, the savers in our economy get more on their money, which we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
But then the spenders, the investors, they have to pay more in interest rates. So to take an example, a year and a half ago, we had a whole lot of business loans ready to go, and they were at much lower interest rates than today. Some of those loans aren't being used, so businesses have changed their mind. So what was viable a year and a half ago at a much lower interest rate is not viable now with 7-8% interest rates. So that is by design what the Reserve Bank wanted to see. They want to see things slowing down a little bit. Hopefully that'll feed through to lower inflation next year and job done. And that job done is key. So if inflation falls as we expect from the 6-7% rates that we've seen down towards 2% next year, then the Reserve Bank's job is done, and the next move is a rate cut.
Okay, so basically that also brings me to my next question, and I think you've answered it, but the OCR was stable in the last 2 announcements.
Yes.
And why was that kept stable if has the inflation come in control now?
So inflation has peaked. The peak in inflation we saw was at 7.3.
Yeah.
We're now running at about 6.
Okay.
Which is still too high.
Still too high.
But it's heading in the right direction, and most forecasters, ourselves included, have inflation dropping to 4% by the end of the year, and then 3% by the middle of next year. If that's realised, then we're on that path back to 2%. The Reserve Bank's done more than enough, in my opinion, by hiking interest rates quite aggressively with quite a heavy hand. That is hurting households, and I think there will be a point in time next year, probably around May, June next year, where the central bank goes, okay, we've done enough. Now we can actually lower interest rates to stabilise the economy.
Perfect. So if the OCR has been kept stable still, the relation I'm trying to correlate for a common man is that when the OCR was getting picked up, the banks were obviously increasing rates.
Yes.
Well, why are the banks increasing rates if the OCR is going up?
If the OCR is unchanged, which is what you're saying, so it's been unchanged since May, and we've seen mortgage rates rise
Yes.
further still.
Yes.
So there is a funding mix that banks use.
Yeah.
So we fund ourselves, mostly with retail
Yeah.
deposits. So mums and dads come in and give us money. We compete for that money, and we compete via term deposit rates primarily. Term deposit rates have kept rising. We're still competing to get money into the bank. We're loaning out a lot of money, but when we loan out money, we need to get deposits in to fund that, right? So we are competing more and more on term deposits. So term deposit rates have kept rising.
Yes.
So the cost of funding the bank, the cost of getting money in so that we can lend it out for mortgages is continuing to rise. So you've seen mortgage rates rise a little further
Yes.
on the back of that.
So mortgage rates, so when they are big, you say there's a mix. So let's say we have a term deposit of $1 billion.
Yeah.
The bank will lend out money of $1 billion. In that case, will they still have a high rate, or they are waiting, or the mix of the money is also from overseas?
Yeah.
That causes the rate to shuffle. Because I've heard that there's a term called cost of funds,
Yes.
right? And there's a term called swap rates and cap rates.
Yeah.
What is cost of funds?
So cost of funds is exactly that. So it's what have term deposits done.
Yeah.
So that's the vast majority of our
Yeah.
funding.
Yeah.
But then we also go to wholesale markets. We could go to wholesale markets on a short-term basis, but when we go to wholesale markets, we generally go for longer term. We want that sort of five-year debt. So we will issue debt for 5 years at a wholesale rate, and though all of those long-term wholesale rates have risen globally.
Yes.
So that cost of that particular bit of funding has gone up, and the cost of the retail deposits has gone up. So the cost of our funds has gone up. Swap rates we use to hedge our interest rate risk. So a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year swap rate will be used to hedge the bank's interest rate risk on the 2-year, 3-year, 5-year fixed mortgage rate that we offer you.
Yeah.
So for us, it's about locking in the spread. We don't want to take interest rate risk like that, otherwise we'll be an SVB bank and blowing up. We don't need that. So we hedge it. You come to me and say, I want a 2-year fixed rate mortgage, currently at say 6.9%. Okay, we are now receiving 6.9% from you. We want to go out and pay 5.5%, whatever it is, and lock in that spread. That's what it's all about, locking in the spreads along the way.
So basically, New Zealand banks are, protecting a lot of their customer interests.
Yeah.
If they are locking in, and because a lot of people ask this question: interest rates are rising, what will we do? How will the economy survive? Blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, if you look at from your perspective, the interest rate rising is good for the country because it helps people come out of inflation. The whole country comes out of inflation. When they reduce the OCR, is it only that time that the banks will reduce the rates? What if the cost of funds is still high? Will the banks still be able to reduce rates?
Financial markets move generally ahead of the central bank. Sometimes they get it wrong, but quite often you'll see financial markets moving well ahead of the Reserve Bank. So I'm expecting our funding costs and those swap rates that we talk about to actually start falling by the end of the year.
Okay.
And to fall right throughout next year, on the expectation that the Reserve Bank's going to start cutting in sort of May, June next year. So the financial markets will price that in before it happens.
Yeah.
And I can see us, lowering our mortgage rates before the central bank cuts. But at the very latest, if the Reserve Bank cuts, then we will be passing that on, straight away.
Perfect. Well, that's a brilliant thing. But that puts me to my next part is that these interest rates the good news is that they will fall. The inflation will be in control. A lot of people are confused between fixing versus floating. 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, what should we do? The method to the madness for us is that, we tell a customer, please make sure that you know what is your certainty. It brings me to your thing, that how banks buy certainty on the rates of, hedging the rates.
Yeah.
It's similar thing for our customers as well.
Yeah.
If they hedge and they take a mix of different things, and they know that they're getting into a rate which is fixed, but they're also knowing one fact, that my mortgage is fixed for like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, at least I've got that stability. If the rates go down, I feel bad. But if they go up, on that matter, do you feel that we've hit a ceiling of the OCR rises and interest rates, or we would see, GFC rates 2008, 9%, 9.5%. Do you think we can survive that 9.5%?
Yeah, so we've got more debt today than we did back then.
Okay.
So we're more sensitive to interest rate moves than what we were. So you don't quite need to go as high to have the same level of pain on households. I do think that mortgage rates are pretty close to peaking, if not peaked about now.
Yeah.
The next big move being rate cuts, so mortgage rates falling next year. We need to be right on inflation. If we're wrong on inflation, then there are other commentators out there saying actually there might be another rate hike, and they make a good argument. We don't think that another hike is needed, and because half of our mortgage book has rolled off already from those really low rates onto much higher rates, and we've already seen a technical recession. We've already seen a big pullback in household spending, right? Households have been hurt by the cost of living crisis and the rise in interest rates. We've seen it, and the housing market's down as well. So that main asset that people have, is off, and that hurts confidence. The other half of our mortgage book is yet to roll off. So there are still truckloads of people out there who are now waking up to much higher mortgage rates over the next 6 months. Half of our mortgage book. There's a lot of pain still to be felt, and we think we will see another technical recession in the third and fourth quarter of this year. So there's a lot of pain that's come through. That pain will lead to a lower inflation outcome next year. That pain is the medicine that the Reserve Bank thinks we need to swallow. We're swallowing it now, and I think into next year, the next move will be, okay, we've dealt that blow. We've done what we needed to do to get the economy to slow down. Inflation's printing at 3% or below. Now we can take our foot off the brake and just normalise rates. We don't have to stimulate, just take rates back to something more normal, which I think is, to your point, it's probably around 4 or 5%. Okay, we can go back there probably by the end of next year.
People were, very happy with the 2.99s. Obviously, the 2021 market was just crazy. You all know that. The property market was blown out of proportion. Properties are being sold 5 times the same night as well. On some prices, 20,000, 30,000. Traders came in out of nowhere. Many people got stuck as well, obviously, because. Do you think we'll ever see the 2021 rates again, 2.99s and 2.19s? Will we ever see them again? Or do we need another COVID to come back?
you would need a COVID-like experience. It won't be COVID. It'll be something else. Something else will blow up in our time, probably in the next 10 years. And yes, I can see them cutting, quite aggressively again to see those sorts of mortgages, rates again. It's nothing is off the table when it comes to an economic crisis. You just keep cutting as a central bank until you find the floor, and we don't even know where the floor is. We thought the floor was 0, but they have now made all banks be able to handle a negative interest rate. So we could even see a negative cash rate next time around, which would just be, in my mind, a potentially a move too far. But other countries did it, and if things are bad, if if there's a fire burning, you just keep throwing water until it goes out, right? So yeah, we can easily see those rates again if the economic shock is bad enough.
And like you said, the economic share and the rates. As a common man, you talked about a normal rate. Let's say the inflation is 2%. We are back in the green.
Yeah.
Perfect. Interest rates have started to come down. What is a healthy interest rate for our economy? At 2% inflation, is 5% a healthy rate? Because, we see 5.9 and 4.9. Is that range between 4.5 to 5.5 a healthy range, or a healthy range is 5 to 6.5? Because I want to prepare our customers, because often we see, first of all, human beings, it's a very good thing, we forget crisis. Mm-hmm. We are so tuned and in tune that we'll go through, like you perfectly had that the inflationary control, OCR, interest rates is the right medicine we need to swallow, right? But in that case, what do you see that, what is the right basic rate what people should be ready for? Because I would suggest, I'm speaking out of turn, is that people get so used to 2.9 as they cry about the 7%. Even though our banks have a good, the rate which they test the mortgage on, it's quite safe. And that has protected New Zealand altogether.
Yes.
But what is that safe rate which you would think is a safe rate for our country? And people should be ready for that.
So it's a theoretical rate.
It's a theoretical rate.
You don't know what it is until you've gone past it.
Yeah.
But, we start with the cash rate.
Yeah.
And where we think the neutral cash rate, that kind of fair, safe, average rate, is somewhere between 2 and 3. Could be closer to 3 at the moment.
Yeah.
You then add that kind of funding mix of the banks and bits and pieces on top of that, and you're at a rate, I think you said the range of 4.5 to 5.5, kind of feels, I'd say that's the sweet spot. So we would like to see the central bank cutting back towards that level, by the end of next year. And that would normalise policy, that would bring interest rates to more normal sort of levels that aren't hurting the economy as much.
Perfect. That's actually what I want to let everybody know as well, because the sweet spot is that rate. Even if the rates go lower or up, what I suggest is that personally, that be ready for that, and even if the rates go down, still keep your mortgages at that rate. Because even if the rates have gone up now, and if they have a habit of paying their mortgage at this rate, when the salaries increase and everything increases, this will help them pay off the mortgage faster as well. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's a win-win. If we can see it through that, SIF, that's a win-win for everybody. It's going to be a tough time, but it also helps us to control our cost, spending we do, the household expenses get reduced, and it makes us all better at the end of the day. What's your take? If you have to give one piece of advice for that common man, what would your take be in today's time on the next 12 months? What should they be wary of? What should they do and to ride the wave and come out with flying colours?
Yeah, I think be the same advice that I've been giving for years, and that is, don't have your mortgage in one piece. Don't have one massive mortgage rolling off on a year's time or 2 years' time. Split it up.
Hedge it.
Yeah, I hedge all the way out to 5 years. Now, I did that in 2018. I hedged out 5 years, and that rate proved to be very high. I don't care, I was hedged. In 2001, I did the same thing again. I broke a few rates. I hedged out 5 years. Now I don't face any refixing until late until 2024 and 2026. That 5-year rate, 2026, has proved to be quite a good one. Having something rolling off and trying to pay a higher rate than what the bank's asking you to pay. So if the bank's saying, your mortgage is $2,000 a month, try your best to pay 2.5. So then if interest rates do rise, you've got that buffer in there.
Perfect. I think that's so brilliant, and I'm hitting right at the spot, because that's what people speak. People get a short-term thing, fix for 12 months, take the risk. Well, when we give strategies to people, say if you want to take the risk, 12 months. But if you split it across the board, it's better. And that's an advice from a chief economist, Jarrod, who basically is telling, hedge it, and if it's a mortgage of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the only way to pay it down is to pay out the principal, extra payments, and hedging the interest rate so that you have one cycle in your favor, the other cycle you're out of favor. Well, that's a mix you keep on going. At the end of the day, you pay the principal back. Thank you so much, Jarrod. It was great talking to you. And so thank you so much for coming on this. And hopefully we'll do it again and again with you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.